December 12, 1939, 9:04 a.m., minus 40 degrees Celsius. The forest near the Kala River didn't make sound anymore. The cold had killed it. 15 Soviet soldiers moved through snow so deep it swallowed their boots to the knee. Their breath turned to ice crystals before it left their scarves. Their rifles, brand new Mosin Nagants, were stiff in their gloved hands. They were part of the largest army on Earth. The Red Army of Joseph Stalin. 1 million strong, unstoppable, invincible. They were here to crush a nation of farmers in a war that was supposed to last 10 days. They were confident. They were loud. Their equipment clanked as they moved. They saw no one. They were wrong. The first shot was a whisper, a crack so sharp it vanished into the frozen air before the echo could form. The man at the back of the patrol, a radio operator named Dmitri, simply fell forward. His face hit the snow. No explosion. No scream. He was just gone. How? One farmer's stupid trap killed 505 Soviets in a... The lieutenant at the front stopped. His hand went up. The patrol froze. He turned. Nothing. White forest. White ground. White sky. The second shot came 3 seconds later. The lieutenant's eyes snapped forward just as his radioman 200 meters ahead crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. This time, the lieutenant thought he heard it. A faint hiss. A whisper of wind. Then the impact. Panic. The patrol dove for the snowbanks. But the snow was no cover. It was a killing floor. The shots kept coming. Crack. A man trying to unsling his machine gun slumped over it. Crack. A sergeant pointing a direction fell backward, his arm still extended. Crack. 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 In less than 3 minutes, 12 men were dead. The 3 survivors didn't run. They lay frozen in the snow for 4 hours, praying they wouldn't be next. When they finally crawled back to their lines, their report made no sense. There was no muzzle flash. There was no sound of a sniper team. There was no sign of where the shots came from. It was a ghost. A Belaya Smirt. The White Death. What those soldiers didn't know, what the entire Red Army command was about to learn, was that this ghost was not a supernatural entity. It was a 33-year-old farmer. A man so unassuming, so quiet, he was barely 5'3". A man who had just declared a one-man war against an entire empire. And he was doing it with a trick so simple, so stupid, it would change the rules of modern warfare forever. This is the story of Simo Häyhä, and the forgotten trap that made him the deadliest sniper in human history. To understand how one farmer could terrorize an army, you first have to understand the war itself. It was a war that should have been impossible. A true David versus Goliath. But colder, crueler, and far more one-sided. November 30th, 1939. Joseph Stalin looked at his neighbor Finland and made his demands. He wanted their land, their islands, their military bases. He saw Finland as a buffer zone, a speed bump against a future German invasion. The Finns, led by Marshal Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim, refused. Stalin was enraged. After staging a false flag operation known as the Shelling of Manila, a Soviet artillery attack on their own border post, blamed on Finland, Stalin gave the order. Invade. The numbers weren't just a mismatch, they were a joke. The Red Army poured over the border with 1 million soldiers. The Finns had 300,000 men, mostly part-time militia, farmers, and foresters. The Soviets brought 6,000 tanks. The Finns had 32. The Soviets commanded 3,000 aircraft. The Finns had 114. The world watched in pity. Time magazine wrote that Finland was doomed. The Red Army's own doctrine, deep battle, was built on overwhelming force, mechanized columns, and unstoppable momentum. Political commissars told the troops they would be in Helsinki, the Finnish capital, in 2 weeks. They packed their dress uniforms for the victory parade, but they had made the same mistake every invader makes. They looked at the numbers on a map, not the map itself. They were invading in winter. The deepest, coldest winter in decades. And they were invading a country that was 70% forest. The Finns had a word for their national spirit. Sisu. It's not courage, it's not bravery. It's something colder, harder. It's a stubborn, quiet grit. A refusal to break. A cold determination that outlasts pain, fear, and death itself. The Finns knew they couldn't win a conventional war. They couldn't stop the Red Army in open battle. So they wouldn't fight a conventional war. They wouldn't meet the Soviets tank for tank. They would let the tanks come, channel them onto frozen lakes, and then smash the ice with artillery, drowning entire armored columns in freezing black water. They wouldn't face the massive Soviet divisions head-on. They would let them crawl down the few narrow forest roads, and then they would cut them off. Finnish ski troops, dressed in white, silent, invisible, would appear from the trees like ghosts. They would destroy the field kitchens, kill the officers, burn the supply trucks, and vanish. They called this Modi tactics, from the Finnish word for a bundle of firewood. They would chop the long, mile-long Soviet columns into smaller, digestible pockets. And then they would let the cold do the real work. The cold was Finland's greatest ally. -40 degrees Celsius. Engines froze solid. Tank grease turned to concrete. Guns jammed. Soviet soldiers in their inadequate green-brown uniforms stood out like black dots on white paper. They froze to death by the thousands, often standing up, their rifles frozen to their hands. This was the nightmare the Red Army had walked into. And in the middle of this nightmare, on the front line at the Kola River, was a small, quiet farmer. His name was Simo Häyhä, and he was about to become a legend. Simo Häyhä was not a career soldier. He was from a town called WWII, near the new Soviet border. A farming community, quiet, isolated, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. And winter lasted 6 months. Simo was 33 years old when the war started. He was short, 5'3", with a plain, weathered face, and hands scarred from decades of farm work. He didn't talk much. He didn't need to. He was a farmer, and a prize-winning marksman in the local Civil Guard. When the war began, he was assigned to the 6th Company of the 34th Infantry Regiment, JR-34. His unit was sent to the Kola River, one of the most critical defensive lines in the entire Winter War. The Kola front was vital. If the Soviets broke through here, they would cut Finland in half. The Finns couldn't let that happen. Simo looked at the Soviet invaders pouring into his homeland, his forests, his fields, his home, and he felt that sisu, that cold, stubborn defiance. But he also had a skill. He wasn't just a good shot. He understood the science of shooting in the cold. He understood it better than the engineers who wrote the manuals, better than the officers who taught sniper school. When he was issued his rifle, a Finnish M2830, a variant of the old Russian Mosin Nagant, it was reliable. It was accurate, and it had standard iron sights. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Uti, offered him a new rifle, one with a state-of-the-art Soviet PE scope, 4-power magnification, crystal-clear optics. Scopes were the future. They let you see the enemy up close. They magnified the target. Every sniper in the Red Army, the German Army, the American Army, they all wanted a scope. Simo Häyhä refused it. Lieutenant Uti stared at him. "You're refusing a scope?" Simo nodded. "Yes, sir." "Why?" "It will get me killed, sir." This was his first illegal modification, his first break from doctrine. To his superiors it looked like madness, like a farmer's superstition. To Simo it was simple logic. He knew three things that the military sniper schools had not yet learned. The glass lens, even if shaded, even if painted, would catch the low winter sun. A tiny flash of light visible from 500 meters away in this white, frozen hell. A single glint meant death. The iron sights of his M28-30, just blackened steel. No glass, no reflection, no glint, no depth. The extreme cold, combined with the warmth of a human eye pressed against the lens, would create instant condensation, an opaque fog on the glass. You would raise your rifle, line up your shot, and see only white. You'd have to wipe it. Lower the rifle, wipe the lens, raise it again, by which time the target was gone. Or worse, the target had seen you. To get a proper sight picture through a scope, a sniper had to raise his head higher off the ground. A few extra inches. In a flat, snow-covered field, those few inches were the difference between being a hunter and being a target. Simo kept his iron sights. He knew his kill zone was between 150 and 400 meters. He didn't need magnification. He had been shooting pine cones and fox ears on his farm his entire life. He just needed reliability. But that was only his first trick. The others were even simpler, and even more brilliant. The Red Army was learning fast. Their snipers were hunting for our snipers, and they looked for two things. The first was muzzle blast. When a high-powered rifle is fired, it kicks up the snow in front of the barrel, a small poof of white powder. To a trained counter-sniper scanning the horizon with binoculars, it's a massive shoot here sign. Simo's solution. He didn't just find a spot and shoot. He built a position. He would spend an hour before dawn packing down the snow in front of his rifle, compressing it, smoothing it. Then he would pour water on it, melted from his canteen, and let it freeze into a solid block of ice. When he fired, the block of ice would absorb the entire muzzle blast. The snow wouldn't move. There was no poof. There was only silence. The second thing they looked for was breath. At minus 40 degrees, a human's hot breath hangs in the air like a cloud of smoke. It lingers. It drifts. A sniper lying in wait, breathing heavily from tension, adrenaline, fear, he might as well be sending up smoke signals. Simo's solution was so simple it was genius. He kept his mouth full of snow. He would lie in his frozen nest for hours with a packed ball of snow under his tongue. It cooled his breath inside his body. When he exhaled, the air was already the same temperature as the outside. There was no fog, no cloud, no signal. Think about this for a moment. An enemy sniper is looking for Simo Häyhä. He's scanning the horizon with his high-powered, glinting scope. He's looking for a head raised too high. Simo's is lower. Iron sights. A glinting lens. Simo has none. Iron sights. A poof of snow from muzzle blast. Simo's ice block absorbs it. A fog of breath. Simo's snow trick hides it. Simo Häyhä had none of it. He was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost. He had used a simple farmer's logic. The logic of a man who lives with the cold, who knows how frost forms, how light reflects, how sound travels in frozen air, to become a perfect, invisible killing machine. And now he went to work. His routine was brutal. He would wake before dawn, the sky still black, the temperature at its coldest. He'd pack his white bread and sugar, simple rations that wouldn't freeze solid. He'd put on his multi-layered white camouflage suit, hand-stitched by Finnish women from bedsheets and flour sacks. He'd grab his rifle, his Suomi KP-31 submachine gun, his skis, and he would tell his unit quietly, "I'm going hunting." He'd ski alone, deep into no man's land, often behind the Soviet lines. He'd find his spot, A gentle rise. A fallen log. A cluster of snow-covered boulders. He'd build his nest, pack the snow, pour the water, let it freeze, put the snow in his mouth and wait, and wait, and wait. The cold would sink into his bones. Most men would shiver, would move, shivering. Ruins a shot. But Simo had Sisu. He became part of the snow. He was the winter. Then, a target, a Soviet officer, reading a map. 300 meters. Crack. A machine gun team, setting up. 250 meters. Crack, crack. A soldier running for cover. 350 meters. Crack. He never fired twice from the same spot if he could help it. He'd shoot, then use his skis to move 100 meters. Find a new spot. Shoot again. The Soviets would blast the old position with artillery, killing nothing but trees. While Simo was already engaging them from their flank, at the end of the day he'd ski back to his lines. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Uti, would ask him for the count. Simo, a quiet man, would just reply 5. The next day, 8. The next day, 12. At first, the officers didn't believe it. The numbers were too high. Impossible. No sniper gets 12 kills in a day. The doctrine said sniping was a slow, patient game of 1 or 2 kills per mission. So, they sent an observer with him. The observer came back at the end of the day, his face pale, shaking. He confirmed every single kill. The farmer wasn't lying. On December 21, 1939, Simo Häyhä killed 25 Soviet soldiers. On December 22, he killed 23. On Christmas Day, 1939, while the Red Army Command was drinking vodka and singing, Simo Häyhä went hunting. His tally for the day, 38 confirmed kills. In a single day. This wasn't war. This was an extermination. The front line at Kola was a meat grinder. The Soviets had 12 divisions, over 160,000 men, trying to break through. The Finns had 4 divisions, 34,000 men, outnumbered 4 to 1. The Soviet commander, General Meretskov, threw waves of men at the Finnish lines. Human waves. Endless. Relentless. They were cut down by machine guns. They were blown apart by Mati ambushes, and they were being hunted by the ghost. Morale in the Red Army shattered. It's one thing to be killed by artillery. You accept it. It's random. Impersonal. It's another thing to be killed by an enemy you can see. You can fight back. You can shoot. You can run. But to be hunted by something invisible. It broke their minds. Soldiers refused to go on patrol. Officers refused to leave their bunkers. They would light fires for warmth and crack. The man closest to the fire would fall. They would group together for safety. And Simo would use his Suomi submachine gun, killing the whole squad in seconds. He wasn't just a sniper. He was a psychological weapon. He had single-handedly created a no-go zone half a mile deep. An entire sector of the front line was paralyzed by one man and his old rifle. We know this, not from Finnish reports, but from the diaries of the Soviet soldiers who faced him. A soldier named Pavel in the 75th Rifle Division wrote a letter to his mother. It was recovered months later, found on his frozen body. It read, "Mother, this is not war. This is hell. We do not fear the Finns. We fear the silence." In our doctrine, silence means peace. Here, silence means he is watching. When the artillery stops, our hearts stop with it. We know he is out there. We know he is looking at us. The silence is the White Death. Pavel wrote about the rules of survival on the Kola front. Rule 1, you never light a fire. The Finns have a saying, Kola holds unless the men are ordered to light fires. We know this. We choose to freeze instead. Rule 2, you never run to help a wounded man. When a man cries out, it is a trap. The ghost is watching the body. He is waiting for the medic. He is waiting for a friend. We leave our friends to die. Or we die with them. Rule 3. You never group up, but you never walk alone. Both are death. Pavel's final line, "Mother, I am not afraid of dying. I am afraid of waiting to die." This was the ripple effect of Simo's small tricks. His refusal of a glinting scope, his ice block to hide his muzzle blast, his mouthful of snow to hide his breath. These weren't just tactics, they were psychological torture. He had systematically removed every sign that a human being was hunting them. He had become an invisible, elemental force. He was the cold. He was the silence. He was the White Death. The Soviet command was now in a state of total panic. Their frontline soldiers were on the verge of mass mutiny. The entire Kola front, a vital strategic objective, was being held at a standstill, not by the Finnish army, but by the legend of one single farmer. Stalin's generals had one desperate option. If you cannot win with soldiers, send assassins. They assembled their best, the elite of the Moscow sniper school. Men with brand new, high-tech scoped rifles. Men who had trained their whole lives for this. Their mission was simple: find the White Death. Kill him. They moved into the forest in teams of 2. Spotter and shooter. Standard doctrine. They found their spots. They raised their scopes. They scanned the horizon. And Simo hunted them. He saw their scopes glint in the pale winter sun. From 400 meters away, Simo Häyhä, using only iron sights, would put a single shot right through their scope. Through the lens. Through their eye. Through their brain. He killed them one by one, the best snipers in the Red Army, dead in the snow. It didn't work. If snipers couldn't kill him, they would use brute force. The order was given. Anytime any soldier is killed by a single shot, the entire sector will be blanketed by heavy mortar and artillery fire. Hundreds of shells, fired at one suspected position. They called it grid square removal. They were no longer aiming at anything. They were going to systematically erase the entire forest, 1 square kilometer at a time. Simo was caught in this. One day, his position was hit by over 100 shells. The trees around him were shredded into splinters. The ground was turned to black, smoking mush. When the barrage lifted, his commanding officer wrote him off as dead. An hour later, Simo walked back to the dugout, covered in dirt, his white uniform torn, a few shrapnel wounds in his shoulder and leg. He nodded to his commanding officer and said quietly, "They were loud today." Then he went back out. The Red Army was now obsessed. They were desperate. This one farmer, this 5'3" ghost, was laughing at their technology, at their numbers, at their power. He had killed their best snipers. He had survived their artillery. They had to try something new. In late February 1940, the Soviet command at Kola assembled a special counter-sniper platoon. Not one man. Not a team. A platoon. 30 of their best shooters supported by machine gunners, given one single mission: hunt the White Death. Do not come back until he is dead. The Red Army, with its millions of men, thousands of tanks, and thousands of aircraft, was now officially hunting one single man. They were no longer trying to win the war. They were trying to win this battle. The hunters had become the hunted. The platoon moved into the forest just after dawn. 30 of the Red Army's best, supported by 2 Degateryov machine guns. They were hunters, given a single target. They moved in tactical formation, scanning the trees, their new SVT-40 scoped rifles glinting in the weak winter sun. They were looking for a man. Simo Häyhä was looking for targets. He wasn't in the trees. He was buried in a snowdrift, 400 meters from their path. his old M2830 resting on a block of ice. He had been waiting for them for 6 hours. He watched them come. He saw their confidence. He saw their scopes glinting. He saw their heavy, clumsy boots crushing the snow. They were loud. Simo waited. He let the first 10 men pass. He let the machine gun team pass. He aimed for the man at the very back, the platoon's radio man. Crack. The sound was gone before the platoon leader even registered it. The radio man fell. A neat hole in his chest. The platoon instantly reacted. They dove for cover. The machine gun team opened up, firing a 50-round drum into the trees where they thought the shot came from. They were wrong. They were shooting at a ghost. While they were firing, Simo was already gone. He didn't run. He skied. Silently, using his white camouflage, he moved 300 meters to their flank, to a pre-prepared position he had built the day before. He waited. The Soviet lieutenant, thinking the sniper had fled, motioned for his men to advance. Cautiously, they moved forward. Crack. The lieutenant fell. This time, the shot came from their left. Panic. The platoon had no leader, and now no radio. The remaining 28 men were trapped. They didn't know where the next shot would come from. They were being hunted. One by one, night fell. The temperature dropped to -35. The platoon was cold, terrified, lost. They needed a fire. Their training said no. Their survival instinct screamed yes. A small group of 6 men broke formation, huddled together, trying to light a small fire for warmth. It was the last mistake they ever made. Simo was 200 meters away, not with his rifle, but with his other weapon, the Suomi KP-31. He emerged from the trees like an apparition, and emptied a 71-round drum into the huddle. The firefight was over in 10 seconds. The rest of the platoon, hearing the submachine gun fire from one direction, and still terrified of the sniper fire from another, broke. They ran in every direction, into the darkness, into the forest, into the cold. Simo didn't chase them. He didn't need to. The forest took them. The next morning, Finnish patrols found 27 bodies. The elite counter-sniper platoon was gone. This was no longer a battle. This was a haunting. The psychological terror the White Death inflicted was now more devastating than the physical damage. Havel's letter had spread. Other soldiers were writing their own rules. From Private Yuri, 63rd Division. Do not look at the horizon for too long. He sees you before you see him. From Sergeant Alexei, 18th Division. If you hear 1 shot, run. If you hear 2 shots, you are already dead. From an unnamed soldier, recovered diary. The White Death does not miss. He does not wound. He does not warn. He is not a man. He is the forest. He is the cold. He is death itself. The Soviet command was losing control, not of the front line, of their men. Entire companies were refusing orders. Officers were being found dead in their bunks. Not from Finnish bullets but from their own soldiers. Mutiny was spreading. And it was all because of one man. Stalin's generals had one last desperate option. If you cannot kill the man with precision, you kill everything with brute force. The order was given. Grid, square removal. The Red Army was no longer aiming at anything. They were going to systematically erase the entire forest, 1 square kilometer at a time. They brought in their heaviest guns, 122mm howitzers, heavy mortars, Katyusha rocket launchers. They stopped waiting for a Finnish attack. They just fired. All day. All night. They turned the pristine white forests of Kala into a black, splintered moonscape. The Finns called it the Kala Holocaust. They were firing tens of thousands of shells a day. Trees were shredded. The ground was turned to craters. The snow was black with ash and blood. and Simo Häyhä kept hunting. The shelling made it harder, but it also made it easier. The sound of the constant explosions masked the sound of his own rifle. He moved through the craters like a ghost in a shattered landscape. His tally kept climbing. 200, 300, 400. By early March 1940, in less than 100 days, Simo Häyhä's official confirmed sniper kill count was 505. 505 men. That's an entire battalion, killed by one man, with iron sights. And that number doesn't even include the 200-plus men he killed with his Suomi submachine gun. He was, without any doubt, the most effective soldier on Earth. March 6, 1940. The 100th day of the war. The Soviets were launching their final, desperate all-out offensive at Kola. Waves of men, tanks, artillery, everything. This was not a quiet hunt. This was a full-scale battle. Simo was in his position, as he was every day, but this time he was firing as fast as he could. Reloading. Firing again. He had already killed several men that morning. The Soviets knew roughly where he was. They had been pounding his sector all morning with mortars, and in the middle of that chaos, a single Soviet soldier, a counter-sniper, got lucky. We will never know his name. We will never know if he was aiming for Simo, or if it was just a random shot in a massive battle. But this soldier didn't fire a standard bullet. He fired an explosive round. Simo Häyhä was lining up his next shot, and a single explosive bullet fired from 300 meters away hit him directly in the face. The impact was catastrophic. Simo didn't feel pain. He just felt a thump, and then cold. His vision went white. His mouth was suddenly full of hot liquid and broken teeth. He tried to breathe. He couldn't. The bullet had entered his left cheek and exploded inside his mouth. It shattered his upper and lower jaw, tore off his cheek, destroyed the entire left side of his face. He fell into the snow, unconscious, bleeding out. His fellow soldiers, who had been fighting nearby, saw him go down. They raced to his position, expecting to find their hero's body. What they found was a nightmare. One soldier said later, half his head was missing. They picked up his body. He was not breathing. There was no pulse. The man who had become a legend. The man who had held back an army. The White Death was dead. They dragged his body to the rear. A makeshift morgue, a pile of other fallen Finns. The ghost was finally gone. The war was almost over. The Red Army was finally breaking through. But for Simo Häyhä, a new war, a battle inside his own shattered body was just beginning. A soldier passing the pile of bodies saw a leg twitch. He stopped. He looked closer. The man with the missing face was alive. His name was Simo Häyhä, and he was not dead. He had been lying on the pile of corpses for hours. He woke up, face destroyed, jaw gone, drowning in his own blood, and he refused to die. He was rushed to a field hospital. The war ended just days later. March 13, 1940. The Moscow Peace Treaty is signed. Simo was unconscious for the peace treaty. He was unconscious when the guns finally fell silent on the Kola front, a front that, despite the cost, never broke. The Winter War was over. On paper, Finland had lost. They were forced to sign the Moscow Peace Treaty. They gave up 11% of their territory. But the Red Army had been humiliated. Stalin's 2-week victory parade had turned into a 105-day nightmare. The invincible Red Army, with its millions of men and thousands of tanks, had been fought to a bloody standstill by a nation of farmers on skis. They suffered over 1 million casualties. They lost over 3,500 tanks. They lost over 600 aircraft, and they had been terrorized, paralyzed, and psychologically broken by one man, a 5'3" farmer with an old rifle. But this is the real ripple effect. This is the moment that changed history. Because Joseph Stalin wasn't the only one watching. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler watched the Red Army's pathetic failure in Finland. He saw an army that was poorly led, poorly equipped, terrified of a few ghosts in the snow. The terror that Simo Häyhä had inflicted, the small trick of using iron sights and snow, had helped convince Hitler that the Soviet Union was a rotten etchachop that would collapse with one hard kick. A year later, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Russia. Many historians argue that if the Red Army had not looked so weak in Finland, if men like Simo Häyhä had not exposed their every flaw, Hitler might never have dared to invade. The 505 men Simo killed were just the beginning. The fear he created changed history. While history was changing, Simo Häyhä was in a hospital, fighting his own war. His injuries were so severe, doctors didn't know where to begin. He went through 26 separate, agonizing surgeries. They had to rebuild his face from scratch. They took bone from his hip to create a new jaw. They took skin from his thigh to create a new cheek. They used metal plates, wire, and grafts to hold his shattered skull together. He was in the hospital for 14 months. He spent years recovering. When he finally emerged, he was a different man. The left side of his face was permanently scarred, disfigured. His jaw was crooked. His mouth couldn't fully close. The White Death now carried the mark of the war on his own face. But he was a hero. Unlike Sergeant McKenna, whose modification remained a secret hidden in the pages of a mechanic's logbook, Simo's actions were too big to ignore. Marshal Mannerheim himself promoted him, from corporal to second lieutenant, the single fastest battlefield promotion in Finland's history. He was awarded the Cross of Kaleja, the medal reserved for Finland's greatest defenders. He tried to rejoin the army when the war with Russia started again in 1941, the continuation war, but he was refused. His injuries were too severe. He was a hero, but one too broken to fight. So, what happens to a man who is the deadliest soldier in the world when the war is over? What happens to the ghost when the snow melts? Simo Häyhä didn't go on a victory tour. He didn't write a best-selling book. He didn't ask for fame. He did what the farmer in him always knew how to do. He went home. He was given a small farm in a new town, Ruokolahti, since his old home in Rautjärvi was now in Soviet territory. And he spent the next 50 years doing exactly what he did before the war. He bred hunting dogs. He became one of Finland's most successful moose hunters. His skill, his sisu, his understanding of the wild, it never left him. He was a quiet man, a humble man. He rarely spoke of the war. When young reporters would find him, decades later, and ask him how he became the White Death, he'd just shrugged. When they asked him if he felt remorse for killing over 500 men, his reply was pure, cold farmer's logic. He said, "I did what I was told to do, and I did it as well as I could." In 1998, a journalist from Helsinki traveled to Ruokolahti to interview Simo. He was 92 years old by then. His face was still scarred. His voice was quiet, but his eyes were sharp. The journalist asked him, "What was the secret to your success? What made you so good?" Simo Häyhä, the man who had killed 505 Soviet soldiers with iron sights, the man who had terrorized an entire army, the man who had changed the course of history with a mouthful of snow and a block of ice, gave a one-word answer: practice. James McKenna, the mechanic in New Guinea, had his 6-inch piano wire. Simo Häyhä had his iron sights. Both men saw a problem that the experts, the engineers, the officers, the doctrine writers had missed. The experts saw high-tech scopes. Simo saw a glinting target. The experts saw doctrine. Simo saw snow. The experts saw regulations. Simo saw survival. The experts built systems. Simo built traps. Simple traps. Stupid traps. Traps so obvious the enemy never saw them coming. Simo Häyhä died peacefully in his sleep on April 1, 2002. He was 96 years old. He was buried in Ruokolahti, Finland, a quiet hero in the land he had saved. His grave is marked with a simple stone. No grand monument, no statue. Just 5 words. He did his duty well. He remains, to this day, the deadliest sniper in human history. 5 confirmed kills with a rifle. Over 200 with a submachine gun. Over 700 total. In just 100 days. With iron sights. A block of ice. And a mouthful of snow. History remembers empires. History remembers generals. History remembers machines. But sometimes, just sometimes, history is changed by a farmer, a mechanic, a man who refused to die. And in the silence of the Finnish winter, if you listen closely, you can still hear it. The faint crack of a rifle, the whisper of wind through frozen trees. The ghost of a man who became a legend. Not because he wanted to, but because he had to. Not because he was invincible, but because he refused to break. That's Sisu. That's the White Death. That's Simo Häyhä. Wars are not always won by grand strategies or massive armies. They are won by the quiet sisu of individuals. By a mechanic in New Guinea who breaks the rules. By a farmer in Finland who uses the cold itself as a weapon. By ordinary men who see what the experts miss, and who refuse to accept that impossible means anything at all. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from history's darkest hours. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered, and we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania. From veterans to history enthusiasts. You're part of something special here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. And thank you for keeping these stories alive.